Hello, my name is Chris, and today I want to talk about how we can think better during difficult times. I'm a cognitive behavioural therapist which looks at how people think and how that contributes to how they feel. I look at how a person interprets the information that they are given and how it can significantly affect their mood, feelings and behaviour. During difficult times you can feel anxious, you can feel worried and very alone. You can ruminate and replay upsetting events and thoughts repeatedly, so much so that it affects your whole outlook on life and your behaviour. During a perceived crisis, people can often withdraw, creating a sense of isolation and loneliness. That withdrawal can be forced, such as with current government guidelines to limit leaving your home, or it can be a choice of whether you feel uncomfortable being around people because of perhaps what you're reading or seeing on the news. Loneliness itself creates a deep psychological wound, and one that distorts our perceptions and scrambles our thinking. It makes us believe that those around us, and perhaps the world in general, cares less than they actually do. It makes us really afraid to reach out. Loneliness is defined purely subjectively. It depends solely on whether you feel emotionally or socially disconnected from those around you. Feeling like you're in a crisis when everything around you feels uncertain is an example of how loneliness can flourish. There is a lot of research on loneliness, and all of it quite shocking. Loneliness won't just make you miserable, it can kill you. Chronic loneliness increases your likelihood of an early death by 14%. Loneliness causes high blood pressure, high cholesterol. It even suppresses the functioning of your immune system, making you vulnerable to all kinds of illnesses and diseases. In fact, scientists have concluded that chronic loneliness poses as significant a risk for your long-term health and longevity as cigarette smoking. Incredible. Cigarette packs come with warnings as well, saying this could kill you and show nasty pictures of your lungs. But how many warnings or how many signs that loneliness can be equally as much of a killer? Usually very few. And that's why it's so important that we prioritize our psychological health, that we take steps to be aware of our emotional well-being. You can't treat a psychological wound if you don't even know you're injured. So awareness is key. Loneliness isn't the only psychological wound that distorts our perceptions and misleads us. Anxiety, stress, low mood, chronic pain are to name just a few of the conditions our brains play a part in influencing. So what are the things you can do? I always think that the first step should be to monitor or help people begin to think about their own thinking. Easier said than done sometimes, so it takes work. And see how this could influence how you feel. Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said that people are not disturbed by things themselves, but the view that they take of them. Think about that for a moment. Could your view or perception of difficult times be making you feel worse? The situation can most definitely influence how you feel, but does it have to determine it? If the situation was the sole cause, surely everybody would be feeling the same, but people don't. Why do our minds tend to stick in the negatives sometimes? We know intuitively that there are different ways of thinking about things. The same glass, the saying goes, can be seen as half full or half empty. There's lots of research showing that depending on how you describe the glass to people, whether it be half full or half empty, changes how they feel about it. So if you describe the glass as half full, this is what we call a gain frame. Because you're focusing on what's gained, then people like it. But if you describe the same glass as half empty, a loss frame, then people don't like it. What happens when you try to switch from thinking about it one way to thinking about it another? Is it possible to do that? Can people shift back and forth, or do they get stuck in one way of thinking about it? Does one or any of these labels, in other words, tend to stick more in the mind? There was an experiment in which participants were told about a new surgical procedure, and were randomly assigned into one of two groups. For participants in the first group, it was described that the surgical procedure in terms of gains had a 70% success rate. For participants in the second group, the procedure was described in terms of losses, who were told they had a 30% failure rate. So it's exactly the same procedure, but it focused people's attention on the part of the glass that was full or a part of the glass that was empty. Perhaps unsurprisingly, people like the procedure when it's described as having a 70% success rate, and they don't like it when it's described as a 30% failure rate. But interestingly, when the participants in the first group were told, don't look at it from the 70% success, now look at it in a 30% failure rate. Suddenly they don't like it anymore. They've changed their minds. They like the feeling of feeling like it was more successful. Participants were then told in the second group, instead of looking at it from that failure loss frame, look at it from that 70% success rate now. But unlike the first group, they're stuck with the initial opinion. They didn't trust it. They seem to be stuck in the initial loss frame that they saw at the beginning of the study. So this suggests that once we think about something as a loss, that way of thinking about it tends to stick in our heads and resists any attempts to change it. This is evidence to me that our view of the world has a fundamental tendency to tilt towards the negative. It's pretty easy to go from good to bad, but far harder to shift from bad to good. We generally have to work hard. People watching current news stories may get stuck in the loss frame for longer, even if there's a positive news story alongside it. To understand this further, I'm bringing out another video on the evolutionary influence of negative bias. But for now, it's important to look at what can be done now. What can you do after hearing this? Firstly, you can train your mind to think better. There's research showing that just writing for a few minutes each day about things that you're grateful for can dramatically boost your happiness and well-being, and even improve your health. We can also rehearse good news and share it with others. We tend to think that venting how miserable we are, or how negative those news stories that we are watching on the TV, will help get rid of our negative emotions. That we'll feel better just by talking and telling people how terrible things are. Most of the time I see that doesn't work. Sometimes sharing can help, and there's a place for that. But generally we forget to talk about the good things. And yet that's exactly where our minds need the most practice. Take time to listen and absorb the positive stories as well if you want to listen to the negative. If it's mainly negative stories, go searching for the good. As a CBT therapist, I encourage clients to work on the here and now and to set small achievable goals for yourself. Keep a diary, good times, bad hours, good hours. During difficult times, even setting hourly goals can help, and work your way up to daily, weekly and monthly goals. And if you achieve rewards, reward yourself. You can also try to reframe any worries or concerns by looking at how your thoughts might be contributing to how you're feeling. Look at it from a different angle, an angle that is rational and consistent with reality. Look at it from a friend's perspective. If a friend or a colleague or a family member told you something really negative about how they're managing things, would you blindly accept it, or could you offer an alternative? Remember what Epictetus said earlier. We now know that bad thoughts tend to stick. One mean comment or news story can stick with somebody all day, all week even. Receiving a bad comment can feel like you have to give a bad comment back as well. Somebody snaps at you, so you snap back, and you perhaps snap at the next person too. But what if the next time somebody snapped at you, or you read a negative news story, you forgive the person that said something, or you looked for the positive news story? What if the next time you met someone unfriendly, or you just smiled and said hello? Our minds may be built to look for negative information and to hold on to it, but we can also retrain our minds if we put some effort into it and start to see just a little, that the glass may be a little more full than what we initially thought. Thank you.